We have a fun little 20-minute recognition we're going to do before we start regular business, which is what we were supposed to do in January, which is recognize operators and receptionists that have shown deference to the disability, that have done right by the disability community. These folks were nominated by folks in the disability community, riders. So right now, what I will do is I will turn it over to. Okay, I'll keep going. So 2022 was the 30th anniversary of this committee. We have been operating for 30 years, so we decided to do something special. And what better than recognizing the folks who get us around, the folks who we rely on to operate the vehicles, but also to book our rides. So we have 5 folks that we have recognized, 4 of which are here. What I plan on doing is turning it over now to Darrell. This was his brainchild. He is responsible for this happening. So I figure no better person to hand out the awards to the individuals than Darrell. We will have a couple of pictures being taken as well. I would imagine that they will be posted in some sort of form, but we'll deal with that later. That being said, looks like Darrell's ready to go. You ready to go, Darrell?
Yes, but then if he says no, you can't.
So as David had said, we were excited to recognize the 30th anniversary of TAAC and its involvement in the transit world. And with that opportunity came about the opportunity and the time to recognize some of the amazing drivers and reservationists and staff that do this work on a day-to-day basis. So with that, we had a number of folks come in through a number of, I think, a couple different ways of submission. So we had, I believe it was over 25 folks recognized. Some of them got excluded for one reason or another, but we did narrow it down to what we thought was the 5 best representation of the system overall. So with that, I want to recognize those drivers once again, and if David can help me pronounce their names as they come up, I would love to have him join me up here, and then we'll just do a quick little photo op. John's gonna take it with us from the communications department, and then when he rolls it out to us, I'll make sure that you guys get it so that you guys can do whatever you want with it. Maybe share it within your offices or within the break room. Say, hey, I actually got my feature ticket with some cool people today. So what we're saying is, this is your opportunity to shine, and this is our quickest, easiest way that we can do it on a budget. We also have cake and water for you guys. That was also my brainchild. I wanted to make sure you guys, if you had to listen to me for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then you wanted to eat something on your way out the door. So thank you for that. And with that, I will recognize Michael Owens for his commitment, for his outstanding, I need to read this, for his outstanding services to the disability community and through his exceptional performance as a mental mobility reservationist. So with that, Michael, come to stand up in the front behind me, and we'll call the other 3 folks up, and then we'll. The next one will be Scott Scheller.
Hello, and
with that, I will say the same day. I will recognize him for his outstanding service to the disability community through the performance of Metro Mobility as a transit operator. He is one of our drivers on the regular route service. So thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Excuse me, can you come over here with your thing so I can?
The next one we recognize would be Richard Horrendous Cruz, Corto Cruz, right?
Thank you.
So, and with that, we will recognize his outstanding service to the community, to the disability community, through his performance as a Metro Mobility operator. So thank you, Richard.
Excuse me.
And
see
the
your
next one
certificate?
is Houston
They didn't give me these
Google.
names.
Is that correct? Thank you, Haston. So again, we would like to recognize Haston for his outstanding service to the disability community through his exceptional performance as a Metro Mobility operator. And that was dated December 7th, 2022. So all these drivers and reservationists got recognized for their outstanding commitment to the work that they do. And we want to make sure that they continue to feel that love. So with that, let's give them all a round of applause. And then we'll join the rest of you guys, and we'll be up there.
Excuse me, can you come over here for a minute, please?
Darrell,
Can I
why
read
don't you
your
go on
name?
over there?
Right, and then David, if you
me to come
come,
up there too?
yeah, if you come with me, maybe we should mention the last one, even though he didn't show up. We can make sure Nikolai gets it.
I'll be Nikolai for today.
So we want to recognize him for his commitment as a Metro Mobility operator as well. I'll shake your hand. Thank you.
I hope my grip is just like Nikolai.
It was just like it, I know.
You hold that, you hold the
Sure, I'll hold Nikolai's.
I'll stand next to you.
All right, well, I'm gonna come back there. Or they let me come in the middle here, somewhere. And then you can come on the end of us.
Get one of those bus drivers to do the backing.
I don't know.
Pardon me?
We can try. How about these guys step?
I think he
Step in
wants
front
the
of me a
track
little
numbers
bit.
behind the picture or around it.
It'll be a tight frame, I think that's why.
Okay, okay. I'll stand up to the side. I'll go down.
How's this look?
Looks good.
Are we good, John?
We are set. Everyone look over here, smile. All right, works for me.
Thank you much.
Everybody else
job,
get their
Mike.
pictures?
Everybody, if I give you my phone, or just send me your picture, how's that?
I got you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
John. Well, and with that, guys, you're welcome to stay and listen to the magnificent meeting that we have. But I know you guys have much work to do in the community, so if I would get the best pieces of cake first before I come out there and eat the rest of it. So, let's go get some cake, and I'll let David start the meeting, okay? Thank you, Michael.
You want me to get this from you?
You bet. And then I'll see you in 2 minutes.
Okay.
And then for a minute.
I'll just do amending the agenda and voting.
All right, and then make sure we get the pilot project.
Yep, I got it written down.
Yep, gotcha. And it's after the legislative update.
Okay.
Thanks, Darrell.
And TAAC members, I'm sure there'll be cake out there afterwards. Feel free to eat cake, but unfortunately, there's no cake allowed in here. Otherwise, I'd say let's eat while we have our meeting. But then we'd get totally busted by whoever it is that busts people for eating in here. I don't know who that is. Somebody probably.
Busters.
All right, thank you. Awesome, Darrell. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming today. We have, I think I see Chris online. Whose phone number ends in 11? Just so I know to roll call you.
It's Sam.
Yeah, I
I'm
believe it's.
Jasmine.
Sam Jasmine, yay.
And then there's another one.
And then I have a number that ends in 32 online as well. Somebody calling in. Who might that be? Just so I can make sure to roll call you. It might be Doug. Sometimes Doug comes in
Doug's
twice.
On the bottom.
Sometimes he comes in twice though. He calls in and.
Do you want to say the
No,
first?
no, it's not me.
Okay. Do we have one more caller on the line? 6123 something 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 32. Just, if you're a TAAC member, I just need to know for roll call purposes for voting. If you're a member of the public, just let me know that too. That's perfectly fine.
Do they even know how to use?
Oh, to unmute, I think is it star 6?
Yeah.
I think it's star 6 on WebEx. It's amazing, I remembered that. So yeah.
David, the last number, the 32 is mine. I'm sorry.
Oh, perfect.
The
Thanks.
612.
Perfect. I know sometimes people do one for video and one for audio. Wonderful. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have more than quorum here. Awesome, thank you. All right, so let's do a round of introductions. I won't do roll call. I will just ask to go around the room for introductions, and then I will go online. Let's start with Carrie.
Carrie Sheldon, Precinct G.
Claudia Fugly, MNCCD.
Heidi Meyer, Minnesota CCD.
Richard Rowan, AARP.
Patsy Murphy, I do not know my district.
Quite all right. David Fenley, Chair.
Allison Edmond.
Patty Thorson, Trellis.
Jeff Danes, Precinct E.
Eric Henriksen, MCD.
Thank you. Darrell's outside enjoying cake, so we know he is here. Let's go online, start with Sam.
I'm Jasmine, Precinct A.
And then Chris.
Chris Bates, Precinct B.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. Let's move on to approval of the agenda. Before I entertain a motion to approve the agenda, I did want to add one more thing onto the agenda because it is not full enough. As some members who've been here for a few years know, there is a statute that exists that says that the Metropolitan Council or Metro Transit, if they plan to introduce new vehicles into the fleet or have new design on trains, that it has to be approved by TAAC first. And we do have some new vehicles being proposed. There is going to be an accessible van pilot project, and they want to get our approval. So I wanted to get that on the agenda this month so it can potentially move forward. So I would like to include that as the fourth thing on the agenda after the legislative update. Okay. So with that amended agenda, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval of amended agenda.
Second.
Perfect. You each got to move or.
I have one.
Oh, I thought. Okay. Well, I was just told that we need to be aware, not actually approve of new vehicles. Thank you. Don't want to misspeak. Correct that for the minutes, please. All right. So we have a move and then a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, that was unanimous. Thank you very much. I will also entertain a motion to approve, December's minutes, since we did not meet last month because it was very, very snowy.
I'll move the approval of minutes, David. Chris Bates.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sam. So Chris moved, Sam seconded. Am I throwing you off, Patty? All right, so is there any discussion on the minutes? Yes.
Are we going to, like we've done in the past, go and see the vehicles? So
I
we can
not
approve any of them, or
not
do we just
right.
hear it?
Not today, but I'm sure we could line that up for sometime this month or next month if you'd like.
I just know we've done that.
That's actually a good idea. But so right now there is a motion on the table to approve the minutes. So let's keep discussion to that.
Okay.
Is there any discussion about the minutes? No? All right. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions? Fantastic. Unanimous again. Awesome. Thank you all very much. First thing on the agenda is what we already did, the transit worker recognition. Thank you, Vice Chair Darrell Paulsen. Second thing on the agenda is the application of panelists for the paratransit appeals process. I have sat on this a number of times. It doesn't happen very often, but we have some updates here, and Brian and Taishia, I hope I pronounced that right, are here to talk to us about this process. Please come on up and
Allison, when I came in the room, I accidentally turned these bright lights on. Is there any way that we can turn this
We
on?
tried this before.
These two right here? I don't know. If not, I can go back and try to figure it out. I turned them all on because I was like, you couldn't see them all coming on
She's done this before.
as you're by the door.
Remember me and you asked that question.
take it away.
Oh, that is,
But
oh, no.
that's too bad.
Perfect.
I knew
It's
that.
a party now.
I knew that was gonna happen.
Moonlighting.
There we go. It's these two, just these two that want it right here, but it's fine. We'll deal with it.
Go ahead. Yes, please begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Taishia Ridley, and I'm an investigation and resolution specialist and coordinator for the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunities Investigation and Resolution Unit. And I'm here with?
My name is Brian Pilon. I'm a senior investigator within that group as well. And today we are, as indicated, here to talk to you about paratransit appeals. I'll be handling the first portion of that, which will discuss what it is in general, and then also just some basic background information for you on that. So to that end, if we could go to the next slide, please. So the paratransit appeal, what is a paratransit appeal, right? Paratransit service through the Metropolitan Council is provided by Metro Mobility. The criteria to be eligible for Metro Mobility is regulated by federal law. The Metro Mobility Service Center is a certifying body for eligibility in the region. Periodically, an individual who has been denied certification and/or their service has been suspended may elect to appeal their denial. It's worth noting at this point that for conduct suspensions, the customer is encouraged to contact the Metro Mobility Service Center to see if mitigating circumstances, provider error, or perhaps a one-time grace period might prevent a suspension without the need for a formal appeal. As it relates to the eligibility denial, the Metro Mobility Service Center does discuss those reasons face-to-face with the individual, and it encourages the applicant to provide additional documentation or information that could alter the outcome, again, without the need for a formal appeal. But in the event that the appeal were to go forward, we have received a request for an appeal due to eligibility denial, a presumptive eligibility is granted for 90 days. Similarly, after an appeal is requested due to a suspension, the suspension is not implemented until the appeal is complete. The appeal consists of a hearing where information is presented by a Metro Mobility representative and by the individual requesting the appeal, also known as the appellant. An appeals panel hears the information, asks questions, holds the discussion, and makes a decision about the eligibility or suspension. The appeal determination is made solely by the appeals panel and is not influenced or decided by any Met Council employee. Next slide, please. So what is the role of OEEO, right? The Metropolitan Council's Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, or OEEO, is the council's liaison responsible for assembling an appeals panel and for providing administrative support to the panel. Appointed. All panelists are appointed by the council's regional administrator. We assemble. A 3-person appeals panel is assembled from the appointed directory to decide the outcome of the appeal. OEEO contacts panelists from the directory to determine their availability. And then OEEO would schedule the hearing as soon as administratively possible while providing the appellant at least 10 days notice. Next slide, please. The hearing process. Just generally, the process OEEO convenes the hearing and facilitates the introductions. A Metro Mobility representative will begin and explain the reasons for the denial of eligibility or suspension. Panelists and the appellant can ask Metro Mobility clarifying questions. Appellant then discusses why eligibility is warranted or suspension is not warranted. The panelists and Metro Mobility can ask the appellant clarifying questions at that point. OEEO would conclude the testimony and closes the hearing to only the panelists to make their decision. The panel chair writes the decision memo and sends that to OEEO within 14 business days of the hearing. OEEO then notifies the appellant and Metro Mobility of the decision within 21 days. Next slide, please. At this point, we'd like to take a pause in our presentation if there are any questions about that process or what it is in general.
Darrell and then Jeff.
So my question is, on the appeals process, it says your notice will go out to the appellant within 21 days. Is the panel, are they never allowed to make what if it's just something really obvious that if we tweaked it a little bit or if we understood that, are they able to make a on-the-spot decision, or do they always wait the 14 days and then the 21 days to the appellant because it is a legal process at that moment?
It is my understanding that and perhaps Andy has something to say about that as well.
Sure.
It is my understanding that decision is made after the hearing and that we're notified of that decision within 14 days, but I'll defer to Andy on that.
Andy, go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's true that for a formal appeal, one of the requirements is that a decision be made in writing and that the appropriate delay take place. However, if there is something obvious that comes up, the Metropolitan Council, Metro Mobility in this case, may drop or alter their decision, in which case obviously the appeal would seek to, or would become irrelevant.
And they would drop that, they could drop that on a moment's notice. Like, I'm not talking about something that would go through a normal appeals process, but I'm talking about somebody particularly that maybe has terminal illness or has a really affected situation that requires them to only use Metro Mobility for that reason, and they've gotten denied several rides because they can't even make it across 6 blocks to their doctor's office. So in that case, what would you do in that case when you know that person is already terminally ill and only has so many months, possibly weeks to live? Because I know there's been clients that have had a similar issue.
Vice Chair, members of the committee, I think in terms of dropping the appeal, what we would look at would be whether or not either the eligibility criteria, if materials were presented at the appeal that made it possible for us to ascertain that someone was clearly eligible for the service, we could do that immediately, or in the case of a suspension, if the activities that led to the suspension were somehow mitigated or proven to be outside of the rider's control and not a direct threat to health and safety by the materials that were submitted during the appeal, then we could act on that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, and I'll accept that as your answer, but what I'm saying is, let's say that they're not even, it's not even something that the rider did per se outside of their control. It's just because of their dementia or because of their terminal illness, they don't fully understand it, and they've gotten kicked off or they gotten suspended for one reason or another, which makes them not be able to get to their blood draws, their dialysis, or whatever appointment that is medically necessary. So, I mean, it's not about the rider or the appellant doing something wrong. It's about the process and the fully understanding of the ridership that you guys are entrusted to deal with.
This is David Fenley. So, Darrell, I get your question.
Okay.
So what we're doing now is more talking about the overarching process.
Right.
At each appeals hearing, that's when we kind of get into the weeds of
The
what
nitty-
of
okay.
what they are. This is, I mean, it's an extremely rare. It happens like once a year, I
Or
think.
4 times a year, about maybe.
No, even less than that. Yeah, it's about once a year that this even maybe even less than once a year. I think I've been on 3, and those are the only 3 that have happened in like the last 4 years, I think.
Okay.
It's rare. We take everything into consideration, and it is very much under it is under the understanding that, you know, folks rely on Metro Mobility for transportation. But, you know, I think getting into kind of the weeds of what of what like a hypothetical would be in a particular appeal, it just like
Right,
it
it's
just
not-
doesn't really fit for this discussion here.
Gotcha, I understand. I apologize. We'll take that
Oh, it's okay.
offline.
It's okay. It's okay. And I'm happy to talk more about it with you too if you want.
I don't know if, excuse me, I'm sorry,
apologize as well.
No, we're right.
I don't know if it addresses it, but there is that presumption of eligibility for 90 days. And then there's also that lack of suspension or the withholding of the suspension until the decision is made. So in that sense, if you had concerns about somebody's ability to access the service while something was pending, that is
Right.
kind of
Yep.
mitigated.
So you at least hold their ridership, their status, while your appeal process is happening. Well, and that's typically the way it's done at the county level as well. So, I mean, the fact that you indicated that as well, that's all I needed to know.
Yeah. It is a good question though. Thank you, Darrell. Jeff.
Well, mine was similar to Darrell's in some regards. I use Metro Mobility. I've never been suspended, thank God, so. But I don't know what the criteria is for suspensions.
It's
When
hard
I'm
to
looking
get
at this thing and you're asking for volunteers to be on it, and maybe I'm getting in the weeds here, but what would be the criteria for someone getting suspended? I mean, how would you make a decision being on the panel that they shouldn't be suspended? And maybe this is a subject for another meeting, I don't know, Chair, what you think. But.
Yeah, I mean, if you have criteria for suspension in your presentation, I mean, it's usually, from what I've seen, egregious stuff for suspension.
Or repeated behavior, repeated denials.
Even then, it's so rare. It's hard to get suspended. It's hard. But that being said, do you all have an answer? Did you have your finger up? Okay,
defer to
Andy,
Andy
take it
on
away, Andy.
The most common suspension is for no-show activity. Council policy or Metro Mobility policy suspends folks automatically for no showing at least 6% of their trips and also at least 4 unexcused no-shows or late cancels within an existing 30-day period. So no showing or late canceling 4 rides within 30 days and having that equal 6% of your trips. Otherwise, suspensions would take place for behaviors that either seriously disrupt transit service or violate the rights of others or pose a direct threat to health and safety of others.
And this is all pushed down from the feds, correct? Or is this council policy?
The overall guidelines in terms of severe disruption, direct threat to health and safety, or interfering with the rights of others come from the feds. The interpretation of that takes place at the council level.
Thank you. Just one second. I'm going to go ahead.
Eric, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my questions are general at this point, but once a decision's made, is that the end-all be-all, or is there another appeals process someone can go through? And then also, for an appellant, what type of advisement or representation can they bring to their hearing? Because it sounds like it's just the appellant.
That's a good
Go ahead.
question.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer to the representative ability to be present. It looks like Andy might be able to speak to that as well.
Andy?
So the first part, the client can bring along, or the rider can bring along anybody they want. And in fact, the rider need not even be present. They could send somebody by proxy, they could have somebody come with them, or they could present documentation. There is no requirement that they be present at any kind of appeal in order for that appeal to go forward. Sorry, what was the other part of your question?
Is it the final order? Once
Yeah,
the-
yeah, the decision made by the appeal panel is final.
And I would assume that's for their lifetime, essentially? It's not if they moved out
Oh,
of
no,
state?
no, no, no. Suspensions for Metro Mobility don't go over 30 days.
Okay.
You know, so we'd be looking at like a 15-day suspension, 14-day suspension, or 30-day suspension.
Okay.
And I mean, with the case of eligibility, somebody might be found ineligible, but we always tell them that if their health condition or diagnosis obviously changes in some way, they can always reapply and they would be looked at with fresh eyes with regard to eligibility status.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Did you want to go again?
Yeah, with that, I have a follow-up question, if I may address Andy, please.
Go ahead.
Andy, with that, if there, how many of those people, since you said that it doesn't go, their suspension doesn't go over 30 days, I assume that all those suspension for denials come back on the system at some point? Do any of them not come back to the system after they've been suspended or deny ridership? Is there any way we can track that or figure that out?
Are you talking about active riding? Do people choose not to ride after being suspended?
Yes, or do all those riders come back on the system? And if they do all come back on the system, I understand because it's a 30-day suspension, but are there any riders that don't come back on the system?
No, there are no riders that don't come back on the system. Of course, whether or not one chooses to ride is their own prerogative,
Right.
but everybody has access to the system automatically after 30 days.
Right, but I'm saying if it's the choice of them, do you know if there's any way we track whether they continue to ride or they don't ride?
We don't track that.
Is there a way that we could, or is there a reason why we wouldn't track that?
Well, we don't track people's ridership trends overall. I think we probably could look at ridership post a suspension date, but it's not something we've ever done, and we've seen no reason to do so operationally.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff?
Just, you said it's rare that this panel meets, it sounds like, what you said, Mr. Chair. Are the cases more suspensions or eligibility requirements? And if they're eligibility requirements, aren't those medical issues? So this follows up with what you said about a representative there, because if I was on that panel, I'm not always qualified to make medical decisions.
I think in aggregate,
for
that's
people.
fine. Okay. If you'd like me to talk to that, I certainly can.
Okay. So if I understand the question, Jeff, you're kind of looking into what the reasons have been in the past for the suspensions?
Yes.
Okay. Andy can speak. Oh, go ahead.
I believe this answers your question. It's far more common to have an appeal take place over a suspension than a finding of ineligibility. Is that your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. For the most part, the appeal panel meets over suspensions rather than eligibility. I got to think. I think I believe once in the last 10 years we had an appeal over eligibility. I think that's an accurate statement, and we've had several in my 17 years here, but they were front-loaded because Metro Mobility shifted to away from self-certification in that time. So basically, people could just opt into eligibility. Once we started enforcing federal guidelines, there were a few appeals that took place around eligibility, but the vast majority of them that are currently taking place are about conduct-related suspensions.
Go ahead.
Follow up to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, kind of to your point, maybe more poignantly said would be, how would a volunteer be able to determine eligibility? I mean, what, if with no qualifications to maybe make that determination?
Yeah, we would want a qualified individual who we'd be looking for to serve on the panel are not medical professionals, but people intimately familiar with fixed route, because bear in mind that paratransit eligibility really is all about each individual's current level of functioning and how that impacts the ability to access the fixed route system. So we would want two different skill sets, or maybe three. One, fairly intimate familiarity with Title II, and specifically how that applies to paratransit. So, what are the three categories of eligibility and how are those applied? Two, a fairly wide-spanning knowledge of disabilities and health conditions and how those may interfere with somebody's ability to ride independently or navigate the system. And then three, the accessibility features or lack thereof of our fixed route system and the challenges and capabilities that are inherent to that system for someone with a disability.
So it's incumbent on the facilitator of the appeal hearing to look at the application from the volunteer to make that determination on if they're qualified or not.
Yeah, we will always, on an appeal of eligibility, share the initial application. And then again, the applicant, the appellant, can present additional documentation indicating why it is they feel like they should be eligible.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I feel like we may have gone through the rest of your presentation here in just this Q and answer.
Well, we're hoping not. So I was gonna pause my questions to you and to my team here so that I can see if there's any more questions that we can kind of flush out.
Sounds good.
But yes, please continue. It sounds like you may have more.
Yeah. Next slide, please.
No, I'll forgo it. Okay, thank you.
All right, so the reason we are here today, and we spoke a little bit about it, our office, we are seeking qualified volunteers for our panelist directory. Panel members would typically be currently employed in the disability field or have a disability themselves or have experience in working with people with disabilities. The appeal panel does not consist of any Metropolitan Council employees. So in an appeal hearing, regulation requires that the panel is composed of the chair or the chair designee of TAAC, an individual who is professionally involved with persons with disabilities, and a professional acquainted with the appellant's particular stated disability selected from a list of knowledgeable volunteers. Next slide, please. So what was brought up earlier, there is a very minimal time obligation required. The appeals panel meets on an as-needed basis. There are no regularly scheduled meetings, and this may be correct or incorrect, but over the last 5 years, there have been less than 3 hearings a year. Applying for the panel directory does not mean you will be called on for each hearing, and applying for the panel directory does not mean you must be on the panel when called. You can evaluate your current availability and decline if needed. Hearings are scheduled for 2.5 hours, and hearings may be in person or online. And just to note, this is a volunteer role, so there's no compensation.
Except for if it.
Next slide, please.
In person, it would be probably your travel or your.
So the application process, currently we are in the process of updating our volunteer panel application form. Some of the things that are included is name, contact information, demographics, relevant job history, working or volunteering with people with disabilities, past panel experience, disability areas with which you are knowledgeable. We ask for references. Applications will be reviewed by my office. Selected individuals will be informed in writing that they are added to the directory, and directory members will be contacted annually to inquire if they wish to remain in the directory. And we do have a copy of our draft application form right now, if that can be pulled up. We were hoping today to get some feedback on the application itself from the committee.
Sure. And we gotta make sure we engage the folks online as well, because I know they didn't jump in or nothing over there as well.
That's really hard for me to see.
All right.
Right, good job.
Good, thank you. Good.
So I'll just kind of walk through each page, and if there's any feedback, please let us know.
Can we,
Quick question. Can
Chair.
you make sure to read
Chair,
all the
may-
words on the page? Hold on one second.
Chair.
Hold on one second. Can you make sure, when you do read through this, make sure, can you read all the words on the page if you'd be so kind? And then after that, at the next break, I'll make sure to go to, just a reminder for my folks online, I'll make sure to come to you all for questions too, because I did not do that last round of questions.
We're good?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, please.
All
Yes.
right. So top of the page, application for Metropolitan Council Metro Mobility ADA Paratransit Appeals Panel. The Metropolitan Council's regional administrator appoints a 3-person appeals panel to decide an appeal. The panel is composed of the chair of the Met Council's Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, or the chair's designee, an individual who is professionally involved with persons with disabilities, and a professional acquainted with the appellant's particular stated disability, selected from a list of knowledgeable volunteers.
so do we?
We then ask for the first name, middle initial, and last name. We then ask for experience, employment, job history. So please list any employment or volunteer experience that you feel is directly relevant to your ability to serve as a panelist for a paratransit hearing. We ask for 3 past employment volunteer experiences, and we ask for the employer's name, position title, the city, state, and the dates. So from when you started and when you ended. So that's just page 1. Then on the next page, okay. We ask that you describe in detail your experience working or volunteering with people with disabilities. We then ask to match panelists with an appellant's stated disability to please select which of the following disability areas you have knowledge of that would make you an asset while serving on a panel regarding that type of disability. We then go on to list first vision impairment, hearing impairment, learning disability, developmental disability, mobility impairment, mental health disabilities, other disabilities not listed above, and we leave a line where you could please specify, and then last, none of the above. Next page. We then ask to please describe any past panel review experience. And we ask, how did you learn about the Metro Mobility ADA Paratransit Appeals Panel? And then at the bottom of that page, we ask for the applicant's signature and the date. And then we have a notice under the signature line which states the information included through this page of the application form is public information under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act and may be disclosed to persons or entities requesting this information. And then if we could go to the next page. All right, so this next form is a supplemental form to the application. And at the top, it says Data Practices Act notice. Information beginning on this page is private, and it will not be disclosed to the public. The information about you contained on this application supplement will be made available only to the members of the Metropolitan Council and Metropolitan Council employees whose work assignments reasonably require access to the information. We then go on to ask for the hearing panelist applicant name. We ask for applicant contact information, the street address, apartment number if necessary, the city, state, zip code, primary phone number, primary email address. And right under that, we ask for demographic information for your gender first, and you can select from the following: female, male, non-binary, and then we have a fill in the blank option where it says you identify as or I identify as. We then ask, do you identify as having any of the following functional limitations? Select all that apply. And we list seeing, hearing, walking, climbing stairs, sleeping, breathing, moving, learning, regulating emotions, regulating insulin, understanding written text. We then have a box that says other, and please specify. And then we have a box that says none of the above. And right at the bottom of that page, there's a note. The Paratransit Appeals Panel regulation requires at least one panelist to be professionally and/or personally acquainted with the appellant's particular stated disability. And the last page, we ask for, race, ethnic group. You select one. We have the American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, white, and then we have a box for other to please specify. And right under that, we ask for references. And we ask for the reference's name, telephone number, and relationship, and we ask for 3 references. And then right under that, we give directions on how submitting your application, if you choose not to do the online form, because we hope to have that, where you could just submit and it comes straight to us. You can mail or email your application. You can send that to me, Tyshia Ridley, at the Metropolitan Council Haywood office, 560 North 6th Avenue, Minneapolis, Minnesota, 55411. I also have my email there listed, tyshia.ridley@metc.state.mn.us. And for assisting filling out this application, you're welcome to call me at 612-349-7583. All right, do we have any feedback,
So thank you for that. So that was the application to be included in the pool of the panelists that would then evaluate the appeal to denial of service on Metro Mobility, not denial of service, but what's the word I'm looking for? It's not eligibility, it's suspension, thank you. Suspension is what I'm looking for. Yeah, suspension. All right, so I'll start with folks online since I glossed over you before. Did anybody online have questions or comments? At this point, it could be for anything, including the application, since I could not see any hands raised from before. So anybody online?
Yeah, this is Ken. I have a question.
Go ahead, Ken, please.
So probably more of a comment. On the form itself, you identify visually impaired and hearing impaired. While those in the visually visual disability category don't object to the term impaired, those in the hearing community do object to the term impaired. So I would change that hearing impaired to deaf or hard of hearing. That impairment is a problem for those in the committee.
Thank you.
For those in the community, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
I think we would all agree with that.
And then you're reaching more people.
Okay, yeah.
Overhead question.
Exactly. Did anybody else have anybody else online? Sorry, Chris or Sam? Nope, okie dokie. Anybody in the room? Go ahead, Richard.
The question I have is elderly people who have disabilities, sometimes there are specific conditions they may be more prone to have. Is there any consideration to including a person on a panel who might be more familiar with issues related to aging? And aging is one of the purviews of our committee here.
That would be helpful. Thank you for giving us that to include.
We'll certainly take note of that recommendation.
And Andy?
Yeah, I think, one of the things we need to be really clear on is that age in and of itself is not relevant with regard to determining eligibility, although obviously It increases the likelihood that someone would be eligible. I think what we would be looking to try to get at is, in addition to hearing loss and vision loss constituencies, orthopedic conditions, memory loss conditions, those kinds of things, especially ones that might fluctuate from day to day in ways that might spontaneously disrupt one's ability to access public transit.
In timing, for instance, someone in the morning is more able sometimes to negotiate these sorts of things than in the evening or later afternoon.
Thank you very much, Richard. I think it is, I know it's been said a couple times, but important to note again that one of the panelists, that you do try to pick a panelist that does have experience or even the disability of the person who is appealing the suspension, which I think is pretty much in line with nothing about us without us, is the mantra that the disability community likes to live by. If there were other questions, yes.
I guess this is minor and just a suggestion or recommendation, but on the front of the application, when you're discussing who the panel is composed of, it goes into and defines all individuals as professionals, but there's a note on the data practices page that actually states that the panelists be professionally and or personally acquainted. So if I was reading the application and I didn't feel I was a professional, I might just not apply. So maybe a little clarification on that last one where you put in the and or personally acquainted, that might maybe open up a couple more panelists or applicants that might see that.
I do see that difference on the form, so yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Presentation.
Continue whenever you're ready. Yes, please.
All right, well, thank you so much for that feedback. So next slide. All right, so yes, so we thank you for that input, and we are hoping that you would apply and share with your networks once we get the application finalized and have a live link online, as well as the accessible PDF. So please apply and share. Next slide.
What's the, Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Darrell.
Is there a timeline that the application is going to be online and live, and is there a timeline that's going where the panelists are going to be selected, and is all that going to be online somewhere so that we can see it? And when will that happen?
Yeah, so right now we're hoping to have the application live online on Metropolitan Councils. We're still determining what's the best landing page to put it on right now. We're hoping to have that by the next meeting, by the next TAAC meeting, hopefully. We are working with communications right now about promotions and rollout and what that's going to look like. So that's our hope, to have it by the next meeting and to get that to everyone.
And is the application process just going to be rolling? So there's no deadline to apply by?
Yeah, so we're thinking of leaving it open. Well, we're hoping to get an overwhelming response. So if we do, we might have to close if we get too many people. But we're hoping to keep it open for at least 90 days, 60, 90 days.
That's all I want to know.
Perfect.
So we got enough time.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from committee members? Heidi, take it away.
My question, it goes back from before, because I just thought of it. If you don't understand the process of being suspended, because most of them are for that reason, can you get kind of like a person to walk you through to understand? Because they used a lot of big words, and even the application has some big words. So the person who's somehow it came to this, and now we have to talk about it, and they have a processing problem. Do they have someone who can sit down and be, really understand you're in trouble, you did something, you're being suspended, and then they broke it down, and then here are your choices and stuff, and how, you deal with it?
So it's my understanding, and I think maybe Andy can answer this better, but that Metro Mobility does work closely with folks who are potentially pushing getting close to a suspension. It's something that doesn't happen very often because of Andy's stellar customer service skill set that he employs on a daily basis at Metro Mobility. Go ahead, Andy, if you want to add to that.
I don't appreciate your sarcasm, first of all. But, joking aside, yeah, we do notify folks in writing, trying to use plain language, but within that letter, there's always a phone number that people can call in case they process better verbally or just have questions. They can call and talk to us. And one of the things that we will try to do, as was pointed out earlier in the presentation, you know, if we can give like a second chance opportunity, you know, if we can do kind of a one-time grace, we will work with customers to try to build understanding. If the conduct really did seem to stem from a reasonable lack of information, then we can forego a suspension. Obviously, that's true with something like no-shows or late cancels. You know, if someone tries to tell us they didn't realize that they weren't allowed to hit their driver, you know, that doesn't work. But yeah, we will work with folks to try to avoid a suspension. And also, we do send out warning letters for everything except for imminent direct threat to health and safety. There's a warning letter previous to any kind of suspension activity. So
you're kind of.
yeah, so and that warning letter also in plain language as best we can, and also includes a phone number so we can talk and have that exchange prior to any suspension even being on the table.
Okay, just because it just sounded like a lot of words, you know, big words and fancy words, you know, not everyone knows those fancy words. And so we have to figure out, okay, I'm in trouble. I know I did something. Now who helps me and who backs me up, you know, to make sure I'm in the right area of understanding. Because I can see, because some of the reason I'm bringing this up, because I see all sorts of different types of people on Metro Mobility, and some would never be able to understand. They just know they have a behavior problem and cause something where it could end up to be that. They just don't know how to do the rest of the whole thing, you know? So I just wanted to bring that up, because they would never be able to do what they asked, that someone else would have to take over and do it for them.
Yeah, and I should point out that you know, even if somebody's disability impacts, you know, impulse control or anger management or the ability to process, you know, they'll still get suspended, you know, if they're impacting the health and safety of other riders or a driver. So we will work with folks. We will try to warn folks. But obviously, we owe it to everybody to provide a safe ride. And if a customer is not fostering that kind of environment, they may need to be suspended anyway, but we will work with them to try to mitigate that. And I will work with support teams too. You know, if I know somebody's team a little bit, I can try to work with them, put notes in with regard to particular de-escalation techniques that tend to work well. You know, we try to do what we can, but I don't want to make it sound like, all right, if somebody has a developmental disability, then they're not going to get suspended regardless of their behaviors, because obviously that's not something we can abide.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you don't learn anything from that, you know?
Yes, and disability rights tend to end when they hurt other people. Go ahead.
So it sounds that most of these appeals or this process is due to a suspension due to maybe behavior or something happening. It's not about eligibility. So when someone is suspended based on conduct or whatever it is and not eligibility, that still doesn't preclude them from needing the service, obviously, because they still would be eligible for it. What type of resources or conversations are had with the appellant about, for the next 30 days, these are the opportunities or things or resources you can use to still, you know, get to your appointments, you know, the service that Metro Mobility did provide? Is there kind of a, you know, you're suspended for 30 days from us for this reason. That was the decision, but in that time, here are the services that you can use or will have to be utilizing. Is there some kind of interface with the appellant like that?
Andy?
It depends, based on the individual, obviously, but we will absolutely talk, usually as part of that opening, pre-formal appeal, but then reiterate, add an appeal if there's the opportunity there. That fixed route, if it is appropriate for that individual in any capacity, and if not, we tend to refer to the hub, what used to be the disability linkage line, for people to go to explore other affordable transportation options.
And thank you, Taishia and Brian, especially for bearing with us through the discussion of the suspension process itself. I think it's important for TAAC members and myself and the public to know before they apply to be on this panel, what exactly does it entail? How do people get suspended? So thank you for being here for the application, but also the suspension and the appeal process itself. Hope to hear from you again. I hope you get all the applications you need. And want, yes. I'm sure you'll get folks from this committee to apply.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Did I see Hannah come in from Government Affairs? We got John just a few minutes early for a nice legislative update, which in what is a uncharacteristically productive session.
We're moving at lightning speeds, right?
They are moving at lightning speed. Well, thank you, Chair and members, for having me here. Despite working for the council for about 4 years, this is my first opportunity to present to a committee or advisory committee. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity. And we were just chatting briefly offline, but I want to make sure that these legislative updates are useful for you all. And so if you have any feedback on how we can make sure that these are most useful for you, please feel free to send that my way. But yes, we are moving at lightning speed at the legislature. So again, as introduction, my name is Hannah Paulmeyer. In October, I started as the council's government affairs liaison. And prior to that, I've been working in the Metropolitan Council's community relations team, largely supporting our council members. So new to the role, but not new to the council. And prior to that, I spent a few years working at the Senate for the Senate Environment and Energy Committee. So that is where my legislative experience started. So 2023 legislative session kicked off just about a month ago. And it is the first year of the biennium. So in Minnesota, we have 2-year biennium sessions that start usually in January, February, and have to end by a specific date in May. And then in the first year of the biennium, the legislature sets the budget for the next 2 fiscal years of the state. So the session convened on Tuesday, January 3rd, so just shy of a month ago. And this session, the legislature and the administration, which the Met Council is a part of, will be considering the historic state surplus and setting the 2-year budget. Yes.
Sorry about that, Hannah. Sorry about the interruption.
Go ahead, Darrell.
So just for the committee's all information, so are we in a budget year or are we in a policy year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they call odd years at the legislature budget years normally. And the legislature will need to pass the 2-year budget for the state of Minnesota for the next 2 fiscal years, which starts July 1st, 2023. While they can certainly pass bonding bills, which are bills that dedicate bonds for capital investment projects throughout the state, and they can pass policy bills as well. Oftentimes it is kind of referred to, the odd year of a legislature is referred to as the budget year, and then the even years are sometimes referred to as policy or bonding years, although they can pass policy and bonding bills this year as well. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
So in November 2022, there was a budget forecast released for the state of Minnesota by Minnesota Management and Budget, which is a state agency that projected a general fund surplus for the upcoming 2-year biennium of just over $17 billion, of which $12 billion of that is left over from the previous biennium. So last year, the legislature did not pass very many bills, which meant that there is money left over from last year to be used this year as well. What's interesting is that inflation is not included in the budget process here in Minnesota, and there actually are bills in both the House and the Senate to include inflation in future budgeting cycles. So at a high level, there is a surplus in Minnesota, but what's interesting is that the November 2022 forecast actually showed that MVEST, the motor vehicle sales tax, which is where the Met Council receives funding from that pot of money, is actually growing at rates lower than what was previously predicted in the February 2022 forecast. So even though there is a high surplus generally for the state, not all funds have seen the same levels of increase. The forecast is going to be updated at the end of this month, and then those monies, those dollars that are determined as part of the updated forecast are what the budget will be based on for the next 2 years. So I would anticipate that when I come back in March, that hopefully I'll have some additional information about what the numbers, the budget will actually be based on. So I think, as you all know, the Met Council is part of the governor's administration, which means that the governor proposes and recommends both our budget requests to the legislature and bonding requests or capital investment requests to the legislature that would benefit the Met Council. And then we in Government Affairs, along with staff and others, help support those requests at the Capitol. So the governor and lieutenant governor have recommended 3 transportation budget items to the legislature this year, and they were just released last week. The first is to identify a sustainable, reliable transit funding source for transit in the 7-county metro area. And the way in which the governor is proposing to do that is to implement a 1/8 cent sales tax in the metropolitan area that would start in October. That would fund the regional bus and transit waste system, and it would help us address what we refer to as the fiscal cliff, or kind of an infusion of one-time money that often comes in from the legislature to help us continue to fund our transit services. And this would help us identify a reliable source of funding going forward. The second recommendation from the governor's office regarding transportation is to increase the regional transit capital bonds that the Met Council can bond for in the region. The total for the next 2 fiscal years would be just over $104 million. And those bonds are then used for replacement buses, for bus facilities, and other capital enhancements throughout the system. It's not just for Metro Transit, it also includes Metro Mobility, it includes the opt-out providers and dial-a-ride programs as well. And then the third budget item is an item that would help us accelerate our transition to zero-emission buses for the region. So it would be a recommendation for $29.2 million in one-time funds that could help us purchase battery electric buses and the charging infrastructure associated with them that would be then used in place of diesel buses in the transportation system. Some of you may be aware of federal funding that has been passed through a variety of federal bills, including the IIJA, which I think stands for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that passed at a federal level. And a lot of these federal programs have the opportunity for states or other entities to apply for sometimes competitive funding to access this federal funding. And so if we were to get these funds from the legislature, we may be able to use that to apply for further funds from the federal government. Metro Transit has a plan of having at least 20% of the bus replacements be zero emission buses by 2027. And if we were to receive these funds from the legislature, that would allow us to exceed that goal.
Meaning we could do it sooner?
Yes.
Or we could potentially add more buses?
I think it would depend on the level of investment that we would receive. Mm-hmm.
And also that puts us in line with the federal recommendation of 2045, right? With all transit buses.
That's a great question. I'm not actually sure what the federal recommendations are.
All right.
Yeah, no, I
We'll
apologize.
talk offline about
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. The last item that's related to financial items from the governor's office recommendations is a bonding or a capital investment recommendation from the governor's office. That would mean $72 million would go to our arterial BRT system.
Yes.
This funding would specifically advance 3 bus rapid transit projects, which would be the F line, which would go kind of up the Central Avenue corridor up into Blaine, I believe. The G line, which would stop not far from this building, it would go up and down the Rice-Robert Streets corridor. And then the H line, which would go along the Como, Maryland corridor. So $72 million is the recommendation from the governor's office, and we're excited to support that at the legislature. I could stop there potentially before I jump into the policy proposals to see if anyone has any questions.
Go ahead, Darrell. Yeah, Hannah, thank you for all your information so far. Are the information that you said so far, are they attached to bill numbers, or are these within the governor's budget? And then you just kind of got to search within his 5 priorities or 6 priorities that he's laid out over the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, great question. So the items that I just laid out are not in bill numbers.
Okay.
But I would be happy to provide the committee the link to where you can find some additional information on the website.
If you provide it to me or the chair, we can make sure it gets disseminated to the rest of us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Heidi, go ahead.
My question is, well, we got all these buses, okay? And recycling is a really big deal. So what are we going to do? Is there a budget in figuring out where the old buses go, or when we start transitioning to a new system? It sounds weird what I'm asking is because things, once they die or we move on to a new bus type thing, where do we recycle it? How do we get rid of it? Because that's a lot of buses. And just so you know, I rode the smallest bus for the first time ever, and I couldn't believe how it was built, with the stairs and very weird handicap and high seats and low seats. So how do we recycle all that so we not kill Mother Nature, we get back to Mother Nature? Had they thought about that? Because it seems like we're going into the direction of saving Earth, like the air, but we're not thinking about how we're going to junk them.
Heidi, thank you for your question. I realize, Hannah, this is probably outside of your scope of knowledge. If you know the answer, feel free to. I didn't imagine that you did. I'm sure there's probably a very limited number of folks at Metro Transit who know what actually happens to the buses when they're decommissioned.
Well, I would like to know.
Hold on 1 second.
They actually get sold at an auction, actually.
There you go. They get sold at an auction, Darrell says. But it is, in the long term, it is better to have more efficient buses, or the most efficient buses, which would be electric, in the fleet rather than maintaining the internal combustion or diesel engines that have been.
But we still have to think about recycling in the sense, because, and keep that in mind.
I'm sure they don't just dump them in a landfill, Heidi. I'm sure they don't dump them in a landfill.
Think about that.
But thank you for the question. I appreciate your attention to keeping materials, in the process rather than going into a landfill. Jeff.
Just on the zero emission funding, you said it was 29 million. That's for the biennium. Are they going to put money in on a recurring basis into the future, or is that a one-time expenditure?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the recommendation would that's been put forward this year is a one-time cash infusion. And then I think it would be up to future legislators to decide how they would like to handle that going forward.
They need more money than that.
Yeah.
It's just my opinion.
Thank you, Jeff. Please, and there are no more questions, Hannah, feel free to continue.
And make sure we catch folks online too.
Yeah, I'm looking for hands online too. So if folks online have questions,
Yeah, you need to
raise your
indicate
hand.
somehow by indicating that you want to speak if you, good.
Okay.
Go ahead, Hannah.
Great, thank you. So in addition to the budget proposals and the capital investment proposal, we are also working on a handful of policy proposals at the legislature that relate to transportation. One is something I'm sure that anyone who's been on the committee last year likely heard about as well, but we are continuing to work on transit safety and administrative citations ability at the Capitol. And so that was a proposal, I think, for the last handful of years now. As I think many of you know, safety and security is a top priority for the Met Council, and this proposal would allow for transit safety officials to check fares on transit as opposed to having police officers check the fares. This would allow police officers to be able to spend their time to address more serious incidents instead of performing fare inspection. And then it would also allow the council to create a process of administrative citations in which, instead of going into the criminal system, fare non-payment would be given a citation more similar to a parking ticket. And so that's a proposal that we've been working on with the legislature for a number of years now, and we'll be continuing to work on this year. Based on the previous question, that bill was just introduced. It was or will be introduced today in the Senate, and I can provide bill numbers. I did not write them down because it just happened, but actually all three of these bills are being introduced or were introduced today in the Senate, and then we are still working on getting them introduced in the House.
Do you need authors in the House? Or do you
I think usually what happens is our bills are sent over to the House, and then the legislators work amongst themselves to determine.
Kind of fight it out.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of interest in especially the transit safety and administrative citations program at the legislature, so we're really looking forward to continuing to work on that one this year.
Are they,
Yeah, and hold on, members, please remember to wait for recognition from the chair before we talk. I want to keep the discussion linear, so there's only one person talking at a time. Heidi, go ahead.
are they billing in safety? You know, the people, 'cause now it's not a cop doing it. But are they billing safety on, you know, like if I hand a ticket to certain people, I know certain people on the train are going to react to it. There's always going to be a reaction person. I don't want the ticket. I don't want anything to do with this. Screw you. So are you going to build in or have in your bill some safety training or any kind of, you know, backup, or can they call a cop or anything? Because I've actually seen some where a cop needed to, you know, intervene, you know, just for the safety of everybody on the vehicle.
So again,
I was just wondering because she's got this neat program, but are they thinking about the,
it's quite all right. So Hannah, if you do know the answer, by all means. I know, hold on one second. I know that kind of getting into the nitty gritty of what could happen in a particular situation is not necessarily in the scope of what Hannah does here. Her job is to hold on. Let me finish. Her job is to mainly advocate for the overarching policy positions that the governor and the Metropolitan Council has at the legislature. But we can take these discussions offline, and we have been presented to by Metro Transit, the Metro Transit Police Force, on this exact issue of I think it was maybe 3 months ago. We did talk about this. But so if we want to have another presentation on this, I'm happy to. But I really do want to stay within the scope of the legislative updates here and make sure that only one person is talking at a time, just so we can maintain some form of, it does help for understanding things, especially for folks online. If there is only one person talking and we do stick to the agenda and within the scope of what our presenter is bringing to us. But that being said, feel free to ask the questions. If I kind of rein it in, that's my job, but feel free to ask whatever questions you want. Are there any more questions at this time for Hannah before I allow them to continue? All right, Hannah, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not aware of the specific training that any new staff would do, but Metro Transit, I'm sure, could provide that information. The second policy proposal that we're working on this year is an update to language about transit fare programs and passes. The council offers several passes to pay transit fare, and some of them are available through employers or schools or nonprofit organizations. And these transit fare passes that we provide are regional passes and can be used on buses and our rail network throughout the region, not just Metro Transit provided services. So this proposal would allow the council to create passes that better reflect our current transit system, and would also provide some additional flexibility to create transit fare programs and passes that would respond to riders' needs. So the update itself wouldn't necessarily say what those passes would be. It would just give us the opportunity to create those passes and programs going forward. Lastly, the last policy provision that we're working on is something that would classify all transit customer trip data as private. As you know, we are a public entity, and therefore some of the data that we have is considered public data, and people can request it through the Data Practices Act. And we are wanting to make sure that that the data for how when you request a trip or book a trip through TransitLink or Metro Transit Micro, that if you book it right now through a website or a mobile app, that is classified as private data under state law. And we just want to make sure that data for customers who are booking that via the phone is also classified as private data. So the proposal just clarifies that transit customer data collected on forms and over the telephone is also classified as private data, similar to other data that we collect in other ways. So those are our three policy proposals that we've been working on, and that, as I said, were being introduced today. There are a handful of other legislative initiatives obviously happening at the Capitol. One is that this year is a year that there will be new council members appointed for the Metropolitan Council. And I think last night was the last of a series of public interviews that have been happening across the region to interview people who are interested in being appointed to be a Metropolitan Council member. For folks who are interested in being appointed, they applied and then were interviewed by a panel, and then the governor has until sometime in early March to make those appointments. And so we can anticipate seeing some new faces on the council going forward. And also Governor Walz in the last few weeks has reappointed Charlie Zelli, who's the chair of the Met Council, to another term in that position. Also at the legislature this year, this is the year for when Metropolitan Council districts get redistricted. So similarly to how just this past 2022 election cycle is when House and Senate districts were redistricted, then there's another process in which council member districts are redistricted to make sure that those districts represent roughly the same amount of people. It's a process we go through every 10 years at the legislature, and it always follows the reapportionment that happens at prior to the legislature using, I believe, census data. So that's something that we'll be paying attention to this year. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention there are, of course, in addition to the bills that we are putting forward at the legislature and the proposals that the governor's office is putting forward at the legislature, there are always a variety of other provisions that are introduced by other legislators or, with sometimes the encouragement of other groups at the Capitol, and we track hundreds of bills on many different topics to see how they may or may not impact the council. One bill that was heard last week in the House Transportation Committee is House File 401, which is a bill that has a variety of policy provisions in it that were heard last year. As I mentioned at the Capitol last year, not a lot of bills were passed around policy proposals, despite it being kind of the pseudo-policy year. And so this bill is taking a variety of policy proposals that were heard last year but never passed, and then reconsidering them again this year. One of the provisions in that bill is a provision that you all likely heard about last year in this group, which is a provision that would ensure that transit vehicle operators receive training on assisting persons with disability and mobility limitations to enter and leave a transit vehicle. So that's a provision that was discussed last year. The council is happy to work on that provision, and I think that one of the parts of that is that we would consult with you all on what that training would be, and that's something that I believe was discussed last year, if I had to guess as well. I wasn't here, but so that's something that that bill was heard and it was not voted on, so I think it will come up again for future consideration, if I had to guess. And we'll continue to talk about that with you all if that bill does move forward. So other than that, I don't want to take up too much time. The session timeline, so as I said, the February 2023 forecast for the budget will revise the November 2022 forecast and will be used as a basis for the budget for the next 2 fiscal years for the state. And then the legislature must adjourn by May 22nd. So my understanding is that I will be here chatting with you all on a monthly basis about the legislature and what the council is tracking and what our priorities are. And I assume, do that through the end of the legislative session. And if there are questions that you all have, I might always not know the answer right away, but I'm always happy to look for additional information and share it with you. So with that, I will stand for questions.
Thank you. I'll start with Darrell and then go to Jeff.
I did have 2 questions, but you answered my second one, so I'm trying to remember what my first one was, because I was concerned about my second one, not necessarily my first one.
Should we go to Jeff?
Yeah, let's try to go
Okay.
to Jeff first.
Jeff, take it away.
Quick question, I didn't catch this before. You said the substantial portion of the funding for Met Council comes from the motor vehicle tax?
Yes.
Yes. So the Met Council receives funds through what's called the motor vehicle sales tax, which is money that is collected when cars, trucks, vans are sold to folks. When people purchase those, a portion of that money goes into the motor vehicle sales tax, and then a portion of that money funds council transportation work.
So that's down because people aren't buying a lot of cars right now? Is that
Yeah,
would be the reason that's...
There's a combination of things like
I don't want to speculate on the economy. That gets a little out of my wheelhouse.
Sure.
But it is still growing over the course of the next 2 biennium, but it is growing at a rate that is lower than what had previously been forecasted. But yeah, I think it is kind of changes in consumer habits. And then I know there's also some, chip shortages and other things that might be leading to that.
Thank you, Jeff. Do any other members have questions? All right. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you every month.
Every month?
Every month. Thank you very much. Yes, yes.
Great. Thank you.
It was very informative. And we have time for our fresh agenda item that was just added on a couple hours ago.
Because we accommodate the public and we accommodate the inner folks within our system. So we accommodated you nicely, Paul. Now, if I would have been chair, I would have said that we could push this off till next month. But because David's chair, we were able to get you on.
Iron fist.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for amending your agenda to allow me to come present to you today. I'm very excited to be in front of you. Thank you, Chair Fenley. Thank you, committee. So what I wanted to share with you, I need to come before you anytime we make a vehicle change to our fleet, particularly Metromobility. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we are proposing is a pilot program to purchase 20 ADA accessible minivans. So they've been retrofitted. These would be Chrysler Voyagers. My understanding is they're the only minivan that can meet the ADA criteria for the different dimensions and so forth. So we would like to give this a try, see how they work in the Metromobility system, and get feedback from both, our contractors, our customers, maintenance staff, all of that as part of this pilot project. So they would be 2022 Chrysler Voyager minivans. They'd be modified by Braun, lowered so that a ramp would be put in them, and then the interior completely modified to be able to be accessible. And I can talk more about that as to what's next. So why do we want to do this? What's led us to this decision? Well, to dovetail back on your previous discussion, there's a huge shortage of automobiles and automobile products in the marketplace because of the chip shortage and part shortage. So that explains some of our MVEST issues here in the metro area, but it's a global problem. So we normally would have made a purchase of our annual purchase of vehicles from Metro Mobility in 2020. We were not able to do that. The state was revamping their contract, and that's the vehicle that we use to purchase vehicles. It's a fantastic contract for us, and we have a great partnership with the State Office of Transit that does this contract. So the contract comes out in 2021. We make a sizable order, and we get word that Ford has reduced its chassis production. Part suppliers are not able to produce all the parts that are needed for the buses, and so everything gets delayed. And the prices go up. So we're dealing with contract amendments right now galore and getting the funding necessary to make sure that we can keep pushing forward to get these buses in service. So they are all on order, and we're just waiting. We got the first bus yesterday delivered from the manufacturer. It looks great. Can't wait to get it in service, and I can't wait to get more vehicles in, but it's going to take time. So we're looking for solutions to get newer equipment into service, to keep things reliable, to try some new things that might be really beneficial for us in the future delivering Metro Mobility service. So the minivan was an idea that was one that kind of floated to the top because we think we can make that work in daily service without really missing a beat and offer us better operational opportunities because a minivan can get into places that our buses can't. So we'll find out. So that's kind of why we're doing it. We're trying to look for all kinds of alternatives to keep us with a reliable fleet until we get our new fleet in. So what's next? So the plan is we believe we have found a contract that we can purchase off of the state of Oklahoma. If we can ever get anybody to call us back or email us back, it would be awesome. And if I can get the vendor from that to send me some information so I can verify the pricing and all of those things. I think we'll get that done. So we want to purchase 2 vehicles right away, get them into service, figure some things out. We'll order the other 18 with council approval. It is budgeted, and then we would move forward. So the configuration of these, we're going to keep it very, very simple. We want to maximize the space to be able to onboard as many different types of mobility devices as we can because we know that the mobility devices for our customers come in many different sizes, shapes, lengths, widths, all of that. So these vans are designed to have the co-pilot seat in the front removed, and that's where a space for the customer with the mobility device would sit and where the tie-downs are. And we think we can extend the tie-down to the back of the mobility device a little further so that we can accommodate longer scooter-type vehicles. And then we would have a rear bench seat that would support 2 ambulatory customers. So basically, 2 ambulatory customers and 1 customer using a mobility device is what these would hold. Well, based on our productivity per hour, we think that we can still, very efficiently and effectively use this type of vehicle in our service. So a lot to learn. I think there's a lot of opportunities. And my goal is for the March meeting to come back with a prototype as close as possible, whatever we can find out there, because they're hard to come by, and have an opportunity to view that vehicle, whether before or after the meeting, however we can build that into the meeting, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions. They might not be able to be answered until I think maybe you have these vans and you start taking them apart. I know Darrell has some questions. I'm going to fire off just a couple, maybe that you can answer now. And then maybe we can set up, once you have vehicles ready to, or a vehicle ready to go, we could set up maybe a little kind of meet and greet with the van and TAAC members. I think that was brought up by Heidi. That was a great idea. So first of all, would these just be put into the system and then whatever the rider or whatever vehicle is available, the rider gets, or would there be like a choice or for the rider, you know, hey, this minivan's available now, or there's a bus available in whenever? I know it's not on demand, so available now, I shouldn't say that.
So that's a great question, Mr. Chair. One of the conversations that we've had is that primarily we would build routes. So the contractors who are, you know, they'd have a few of these, they would build a route primarily around ambulatory customers, which represents about 70% of our rides each day. And so, but on the fly, if we needed to move trips around and we happen to have one from a customer in a mobility device, we would be able to then, if that vehicle was nearest in the system, we could be able to deploy that to keep it efficient and on time. That's one thought that we have.
Okay. Good. And short of, I mean, obviously you can't put, you know, 3 wheelchairs on these buses. Short of the capacity, would they be able to handle the same single ridership parameters? You said, you know, all shapes and sizes of wheelchairs, scooters. I know some scooters can be longer. Are you aiming to have it to be able to handle the same exact dimensions of a chair or mobility device that the current buses do?
Mr. Chair, that's our goal.
Okay.
Is to try to get so right now we exceed the minimum footprint for a mobility device quite extensively on our buses. We really maximize our space to the best of our ability, and it's worked really well. I may not have that opportunity with a minivan, and we're going to learn a lot more as we get into it, and so we will definitely react and adjust as appropriate.
Thank you. And I realize these questions I'm asking do depend on a lot of different things, but I'm asking them now so you kind of have an idea of what you're shooting for.
Yeah.
What's the entry? Would it be rear entry or side entry for loading up?
It would be a side entry.
Side entry. Okay, good.
Yep. We don't think a rear entry would work as well in the metro area.
I totally agree. That's why I asked that question. I know a lot of the minivans you see now in the private sector for transportation, a lot of them are rear entry, and it makes it a little more difficult, I think. I'll go to Darrell, and then I'll go to Heidi.
Yeah.
Paul, I have a couple of concerns, and most of it relates to equity and fairness. What you said was that 70% of your rides come from your ambulatory customers. So that and if you're doing a rear entry or a side entry, regardless what you think, if you look at the federal transportation system overall throughout the federal government, they are exclusively looking at the rear entry issue. And I know David, he works in accessibility and some things like that within his other job, but I do know that I have used rear entry and side entry, and I do know that rear entry, I have a lot more ability to get out in tighter spaces than I do on a side entry situation. However, having said that as well, you also indicated to me that the front seat of your minivan would pull out. So effectively, if you did have that done, you could effectively put 2 wheelchairs there. And that means that my family could effectively take a ride together instead of having to book 2 separate vehicles because of a one mobility device situation. So what I'm trying to say is that I know there are minivans where we can put 2 full-size wheelchairs in there because I've been in them.
Yep.
We rent them at events when we go to events. So my thing is when you look at purchasing these 2 vehicles and then these next 18, I understand that we're looking at this as a situation that covers 70% of your rides, right? But as we look at this option, I believe other folks, such as myself, are going to ask to ride that ride because it's going to be a better ride. It's going to be smoother. I'm going to know that my driver has more confidence and more ability to drive that smaller vehicle than to drive a big Metro Mobility diesel bus. I mean, so you're looking at, I mean, I know we're looking at covering 70% of your rides, but if we don't have the ability to choose that, then it looks like unfairness or you're just creating another specialized service for some ambulatory folks that could actually be engaging to ride the main system if they had the skills or the supports to do so.
Chair.
I know that was a lot.
It was, and I think what I heard from there, and I also had a note here on my paper to ask this question too, is are you planning to have these be able to hold two folks who use wheelchairs,
On an emergency basis?
or just one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is available right now is, I believe, the one wheelchair location. Yep.
Okay.
But obviously, if we get, as part of this pilot, if we have the opportunity to pick up a couple that have multiple spaces, we could certainly look at that.
Follow up.
Okay, go ahead, Darrell.
So if you're saying the only one spot is available, the passenger side on the front of the vehicle is only available. I also know that those fold-up seats that are by the lift that the ambulatory folks would be able to sit on, if those could be folded down and pushed forward, and you could put a wheelchair right there, because there are taxis that do that, and so that means that you could effectively put two devices on there. And I mean, I'm not saying you're going to have that ability to do that a lot, right? But if you had an ability where you did have a family such as mine that uses two wheelchair devices, right, at the same time, then we could effectively take the same ride as a family, like I should be able to do anywhere in the system.
Thank you, Darrell. I think Andy had some clarification, and then we can come back to you.
Just a small clarification, since these are recorded for the record as somebody who has done paratransit evaluations, it would be an unfair and unrealistic portrait to say that ambulatory folks can typically use the fixed route system with training and resource available to them. There's all sorts of ambulatory folks for whom that is never an option. So I just needed to clarify that for the record.
Or it might not be their choice, but it still is an option. We talked about options a lot last month.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Darrell.
Yeah, it's a challenging issue because we want to, again, if we, in looking at the spacing and looking at the dimensions of the interior of a minivan, we can have two spaces for mobility device customers. The one behind the seats, behind the driver's seat and the passenger seat, is a very limited one, and we know that not all mobility devices would fit in there. And so if we did have multiple mobility devices in there, are we compromising all possibilities in the co-pilot seat area? And so we're trying to maximize maneuverability within the vehicle itself and that kind of thing, Darrell. But remember, a couple of big picture things that we have to remember. We run 530 demand vehicles in service. 20 vehicles represents a fairly small percent of the fleet. There are certain parameters that we would certainly set up so that we would not put families and others in a situation in which this unit would not show up, knowing full well that we had, specific requirements at the pickup.
So, thank you. Before we get to the last two questions and we move on, we do have 10 minutes left. This is an initial presentation on this. I think getting into the weeds about how, you know, the program's going to be implemented in terms of, you know, is this going to show up for a family? I think maybe we can hold that discussion off until these vans are actually put into service. And I think, hold on, you got to wait for me to finish, man. Clearly they're taking that into consideration.
No,
I know. Give me a second, dude. You gotta wait, man.
I'm waiting.
You gotta wait, dude.
I'm waiting, but you're there as well.
We have two other people who want to talk. I do understand your reasoning behind this. We have 10 minutes left. We have a few other things on the agenda as well. Darrell, you have 30 seconds.
That's what I was gonna say. The reason why I brought those up to you is because you said that you were going to look at these you were looking at this option in the next month to looking at purchasing the first two vehicles. So what I'm saying is if you're looking at those options, then please explore the possibility of a two mobility device tied out in a minivan situation, because I know it exists. I've used it. I have a friend that has a minivan, and I've put my wife and myself in that van multiple times. It's tight, very tight, but I've done it. So I do know that it's available, and that's the only reason I brought that to your attention.
Thank you, Darrell.
Appreciate that, Darrell.
Yeah, it is very important. It also is important to note that private vehicles are very different than vehicles intended for public use too. Heidi?
Well, my question, well, Darrell kind of answered it. Well, because I remember my mom and my dad had to get a van like what you're talking about and put her in the front. But is the driver, if you do what Darrell wants, is the driver going to respect us sitting next to him? And because it's a lot different than being behind him, because they kind of live in their own little world and drive us, you know? So, you know, that's one thing to think about. And then the other thing is, are you thinking about PCAs or a caregiver or somebody who has to come? Because when at Gillette and I see the ones where they drive the wheelchair in the back of the vehicle, it's never just one person. It's always like another person that has to come along with that person in order to do what they need to do. So are you building that helper to come along because I don't know, because in the past you have sent the wrong vehicles, and I've heard it, I've been there, I've seen it. It's not even funny, and then we have to figure out how we're going to deal with it, because I've actually been in the middle of one of them. So just something to think about when you're putting this together. Think about anybody who has to come along, because I don't know what vehicle they're thinking when you go out and put that person in there.
Thank you, Heidi. That's a very good point. Companions, caregivers, I think that you definitely have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, Chair Fenley, committee members. So each vehicle is spec'd out in the system with a capacity and capacity types. And so in theory, you should not exceed your capacity types when you build the route. You know you have enough seats and spaces for everybody. So I do know that things from time to time do get messed up, but yeah, we would, if we needed more than it could hold, we would use a different vehicle.
Yep, go ahead, and then Chris online. Hold on one second, Chris. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I do have multiple questions, but for the sake of time, I'll just keep it to one. So definitely looking forward to your next meeting with us. My question is why 20? I understand that's relatively small in regards to the number you listed. I think it was 500 and some. And my question about that is, first, it's a pilot program. Pilot programs tend to be smaller in nature, but my understanding is we're having to decrease some level of service goals because of either retention of drivers or recruiting new drivers, and by putting in eventually potentially 20 new vehicles would require, I would assume, 20 new drivers. So balancing a pilot program with the needs of retention and employment, I'm just curious on kind of how we got to the 20 number and if that's been thought of.
Mr. Chair, committee member, great question. Really, the 20 number was based on what pot of money could I get, and that would fund a certain number of vehicles. And that's kind of how the 20 came up. sort of my last pot of money that I can use because everything's tied up in bus purchases. So I can't spend anything that's tied up. So that's where kind of the numbers fell from a budgeting standpoint, is that I have this funding available and I can use it on this project, and based on the price of each vehicle, this is about how many I can get. We felt it was a good size number to start with to try out in the field. And as far as these may replace some of our worst, the equipment that needs to be retired. And so it's not necessarily an expansion of fleet and therefore an expansion of the need for drivers. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Andy?
Chair, members of the committee, I realize, sometimes we're so knee-deep in this stuff all the time that we forget to say what to us is sort of the obvious. And a piece here is that because of supply line issues, we are using vehicles that our policies would dictate we would have taken out of service some time ago. And the silver lining in it is that turns out our original retention schedule has proven out to be a good one. That there's reasons that we get rid of the buses when we do and put them out for auction. We've had issues with windows falling in. We've had issues with vehicles spontaneously catching on fire. And we have a very, very common, relatively speaking, issue with lifts becoming functionally inoperable on buses because the floorboards in front of the lift on board the bus become unusable. So a bus warps, no pun intended, into an ambulatory-only vehicle that folks can't use anyway. So this isn't really about, was already stated by Paul, isn't really about expanding the fleet as much as it is about dealing with our supply line realities and trying to have enough usable vehicles out on the street to respond to service needs as well as our driver supply will allow us to do.
Yeah, it is a global problem that we are responding to. Chris, go ahead.
Thank you, David. My question is from a fiscal standpoint. The vans are going to be more cost efficient as far as fuel is concerned, correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
So, I mean, in essence, we could be looking at doing the vans and getting rid of the buses because one will be, look at the price of gas. There's like $2 a gallon difference between diesel and gasoline. Is that what we're looking at for long term, to go to the vans instead of the buses?
Let me clarify one point. None of our fleet is diesel. It's all gasoline operated vehicles, and the Metromobility side.
Okay.
The second issue is one of the things that we can never forget is that we build our vehicles for maximum flexibility and operation. So we're very nimble every day out there on the street. And what we have found is that the cutaway vans, cutaway buses that we use give us the greatest flexibility out in service day in, day out, ride in, ride out. So the vans probably clearly would not give us that level of flexibility throughout the day. But there is, I believe, a niche in which it fits very nicely into the service at a certain level. The question is, well, what level? What's the sweet spot? What's the right number of vehicles on an average day for that type of vehicle? Just like we use, a few sedans out in service. What's the kind of the sweet spot in your service requirements for all that equipment? But the backbone of the Metromobility service probably always will be some type of vehicle that is going to have the current configuration or a similar configuration that we have now. Eight ambulatory customers and 3 spaces for customers utilizing mobility devices.
Thank you. This is not the last. This is not the last we're going to hear of this, and I hope to visit one of these vans. And I do appreciate all the comments that folks have made. I'm sure that Metromobility will take this into consideration. We have no minutes left, Heidi, so if you can make it very, very quick, that would be great, because I'm going to fly through the rest of the agenda.
Mine is really quick. When you order the new van, make it as close to what the real thing is going to be like, so we can get some kind of feedback correctly instead of just mumbo jumbo stuff.
So one of the challenges is the vans, some of the or all the vans may be built already. I may be buying already produced vans. So we're trying to, like Andy said, we kind of are in dire circumstances. So we're trying to just get things as quickly as possible to augment our current fleet condition. But down the road, this gives us a chance to explore and figure out what they can do and what they can't do. So I really thank you for your time today. I really appreciate the conversation and the questions. And we'll, like David said, we'll be back. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity to open the floor up to members of the public, be they online or in person. That is one portion of the agenda I am not willing to forego.
What?
Yay. Okay, no members of the public. I want to give this opportunity to Ken, Chris, or Darrell to jump in on subcommittee. If you do not have an update, that is fine. But if you do, chime in now. Ken, do you have an update on Blue Line?
I don't think Ken's.
Or Chris.
I see Chris nodding his head. No, Darrell, I think you emailed something out.
I do have an update on Purple Line, actually, and the Gold Line. The Gold Line is, we started a construction for the Gold Line. You might have seen the notes as they come out. They've come out in the last couple months. They're doing some construction on that line right now. But the Purple Line has had some challenges, and particularly the Purple Line sits in Maplewood, where I represent and where I reside from. And so we are doing a public engagement with the city and our community around the Purple Line and the BRT process. So tonight I will be with the Met Council members and staff doing the Purple Line engagement here out in Maplewood. So I will send my updated report for the Purple Line in our notes.
Thank you, Darrell. Ken, did you have anything on the
Yeah, I'll
Blue?
just say very shortly, just to remind folks, the Blue Line Extension Advisory Committee has just restarted. So at our last meeting, we have a meeting tonight, but at our last meeting, we just re-elected co-chairs and reviewed our charter. So we're basically starting from scratch, and we're underway. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ken. I'm not sure, Doug, did you want to say a few things on the bus priority seating TAAC work group? If not, that is okay.
If not, I want them to come back for a report next month.
Yes. All right, I will take that as a no. Do any members have comments? No member comment? All right, I realize that I am responsible for cramming this agenda jam-packed. Thank you for bearing with me. I think we made it with less than or negative 1 minute to spare. Thank you very much. Consider the February TAAC meeting adjourned.
And then David, we'll go into our meeting and then.
Bye all.